and welcome to this episode of Musically Cogitating, a podcast about the relevance and importance of living in contemporary music of all kinds, and about how all of that music and all of that art and everything else impacts our everyday lives. I am your host, Ciyadh. Thank you so much for joining me here on yet another podcast Wednesday. As always, any important and relevant links will be linked in the show notes. I wanted to share that we're coming up on 1 year of this podcast. That is almost 1 year of me sitting down and publishing something to you every other Wednesday for, almost a year. And I am so appreciative and excited and glad, and I'm really grateful that you all continue to listen and support the show. So in September, I'm going to be announcing something a little special for you all. So make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast wherever you listen, and that you're following on social media, and that you're signed up for the newsletter, because I will be announcing through all of those different channels, and it's going to be really exciting. Hint, hint, you could win something. That is all that I am going to say about that. Okay, and with that in mind, I'm going to give you this week a behind the scenes of the Musically Cogitating podcast. We're going to do a behind the scenes episode. And it's no secret that I love podcasting. I mean, I absolutely love this medium, and I am so passionate about this medium. And in short, I believe that everyone should have a podcast. If not a podcast, then some way to share and process ideas in a public manner, in a public space, and just be able to have community with people. You don't have to create the community. It just kind of comes around the thing and the topic and the idea. And I think everyone should do that. And it's really life-changing, ? Because I'm not going to say that, oh, my life has changed so much in the past year. I mean, of course it has, because our lives are always changing. But, it has been a really awesome part of my life for the past year. I will say that. And it's been so much fun for me, and I just really enjoy it. And I think that you do if you're listening to this podcast. So, if you're listening to this podcast and you've always wanted to hear how other people create their shows, then this episode is definitely for you. And if you do not care to create a podcast, then I would say this still is an episode for you, because it's another episode of this podcast. And I think that learning about how people do things and share processes is always really relevant. I love getting to talk about music, and it's something that I'm obviously really passionate about, and so I made a podcast about it. I get to think out loud, and you get to hear me think out loud. So I, as a fan of podcasts and also as a podcaster, am obsessed with the process of creating a podcast. I love listening to people talk about their process for coming up with episodes, for editing them, for understanding concepts, and just everything about the process of making a podcast show I find utterly fascinating. And I'm so into this that I listen to a few podcasts about making podcasts. Like, how meta is that? And because I've been working on this for a while, I'm feeling like I have a process that I am at the moment pretty happy with, and so I wanted to make an episode about that. For all of the services that I use, so the different apps and websites and things, I'll have links to them in the show notes. And disclaimer, some of them will be affiliate links, which means that it won't cost you any extra to use that service or to sign up, but I might get a little something for recommending that. So just be mindful of that, and I always have that little disclaimer in the show notes anyway. I will say that I do spend a little bit of money to make the show, but you don't have to do that in order to make a really meaningful show. The show is just important to me, and it's an investment for me, and it's fun, and I'm in the position to be able to do so, and so I do, but you don't have to. I already had a lot of the stuff that I needed from other things in my life to be able to start the show. So I've had this microphone for like 5 or 6 years, and it is good enough for right now. And so that's just what I use. I don't use any super fancy editing software. I use the one that came on my computer. I use apps mostly that don't break the bank too much, although sure, they do cost some, but that's totally fine, and I'm in a position to be able to do so. But you totally don't have to spend any money to make a podcast. You can use your phone to do it and then just put it on YouTube, or for my other limited series show, I use a service called Anchor, and it's free, and it helps you to distribute the shows into the platforms. And so I really recommend it if you're not sure how long you're going to be able to commit and stick it out for the podcast. But if you just want to get started and practice, and you can create a podcast and not tell anybody about it, and you're still a podcaster. I would recommend sharing your episodes with a few people, just so that people are listening and that you're sharing, because that's kind of the point. But just make the thing. If you're interested, if you're passionate about something, you can make a podcast about anything. You can be an influencer, a really knowledgeable person about anything on the internet. And I think that is really the beauty of it all. And so again, I will say everyone should have a podcast, and go do it now. Of course, if you have any questions about anything that I talk about, feel free to send me an email. My email is always in the show notes, or send a DM or something, and I would be more than happy to help you get it all set up. And I would be happy to listen to your episodes. I would love to know who are the people who podcast but also listen to this podcast. That'd be a little fun statistic to know. I wanted to talk about the idea. So, of course, most of the things in my life are music related, so it's easy to have that as the kind of overarching idea for most every episode and for the show, and then to just kind of go from there. So every episode, of course, begins with an idea, and I get ideas from all over the place, literally everywhere. Lately, most of my ideas come to me when I'm driving, because that's complicated, because texting and driving is very dangerous. And so if I'm driving and I think it's a really good idea, then I try to hold on to that idea until I get to my destination, and then I write it down really quick in my Bear app. And if I get to my destination and I don't remember the idea for the episode or whatever, then it probably wasn't a good idea anyway, and so I don't really worry about it at all. If it's a good idea, it's worthy being written down. If it's not a good idea, it's probably not. So whenever I'm writing something down, I try to leave myself as much context about the idea as I can. So I don't just write down like music. I might write down, for instance, behind the scenes of the Music Coaching podcast, and then a few bullet points of what I want to talk about, because it might be a while before I'm able to get back to that episode. And so I want to leave as many notes and clues and ideas for my future self about the idea or the theme as I possibly can. And I use 2 apps to hold all of these ideas, my idea repository. So I use the Bear app, which is a really good notes app that you can have on your phone and your computer and all that. And then I also use Trello, which helps me kind of do some of the larger scale organizing and operations. A lot of people might use that for work, but they both have free options, and so I use the free options, and I really like them. And also, I do use a lot of analog tools as well. So yes, some ideas go on paper, but eventually all the ideas go into either Bear or Trello. And I try to check those 2 services and update them pretty regularly. It's not every day, but it's probably at least once a week. And then, of course, my ideas come to me as I have them, as inspiration strikes. Depending on how serious you are about your podcast. You might be really organized about it, or you might not be organized at all. And I think it also depends on the topic. If you're doing solo podcasts and you need to do some prep, then you might want to be a little bit more organized, and you probably want to be. But if your show is about nothing in particular, it is just you talking about your life and your work and what you're interested in at that moment, then you might not need to do a lot of planning and organizing, which is totally fine. I just really, really love the show, so I'm really organized about it because I want it to be the best show that it can possibly be. And I know that the best way for me to do that work is to plan and organize everything. So once I have an idea, I'll add it to my list of upcoming topics. And once I'm ready to produce the episode, then I do a few things. I make a to-do list for that episode. So all of the steps from writing and coming up with the idea to, which is kind of backwards, but writing and coming up with the idea to editing it, to recording it, all that stuff, to publishing it. I have that list that I just kind of copy and paste into that episode in Trello. And then I start to do the research. And every Trello card, if you use Trello, you'll know what this means, but every kind of card or note in Trello has a due date. So I know kind of what I'm working on, because I'm usually working on more than one episode idea at a time. And that's just because I like to stay a little bit ahead, because I, like you, am a little bit busier sometimes. And so I like to try to, of course, plan and organize everything so that I do not miss an episode of this show. The kind of second broad thing that I do once I've done all that organizing is research. So some topics, like the book club episodes, do require more research. They require some pre-work, like reading the book. And, I love reading, so it's really easy for me to do that. And I don't really necessarily consider that to be prep for the episodes, but that is part of the preparation. And so if I'm reading a book, then the research might be gathering the info about the author and kind of outlining the things that I want to say in the episode. But that is something I'll also talk about in the next section here. If I want to talk about something that I have some familiarity with, but I don't really know all of the details, then I'll definitely do some research. Now, of course, I'm using the word research loosely. It involves probably, looking at resources that you would assume one would look at. So just Googling social media, YouTube, listening to other podcasts sometimes. So those are kind of the sources that I use as research. Doing a podcast like this, like a solo monologue show, is awesome, and it is very time consuming. A lot of people probably don't put as much time into their episodes if they're doing like interview shows. I could be wrong, but I think I'm leaning towards being right about that. So if you're doing a solo episode like the ones that I do, these cogitations, these monologues, then you probably want to do a little bit of writing or outlining. And so for every episode that I do by myself, at least, I always do some sort of outlining and writing before I record the show. It's not that everything that I say is written down, because that would take entirely too long, and no one wants to listen to anyone just read off of a screen, unless, of course, that is the point of the show. That's not the point of this show, so that's not what I do. But I do need to do some prep, because if I am left unchecked and without a plan, then I will just go on and on and on and on and on and on and on about a topic, and that's good sometimes, and sometimes that's not so good. So I need to do some planning, and I would say that every episode is a mix of both. Some things are, of course, written and lines that I say, and then a lot of it isn't, and I just kind of go off the cuff, I think extemporaneously, and I go from there. And I think that it turns out pretty good. There's a good mix. I'm happy with the mix. And so whenever you're ready to start your podcast, I would recommend outlining at the beginning pretty heavily until you feel really comfortable about it. But even people who, are quote unquote professional podcasters and do this as a living, they do this kind of same process. And so don't think that you're not good at talking on the mic and that it's bad that you need to do outlining. No, you do outlining and organizing because you care and you want the show to be good. For interviews, of course, I do have some ideas and questions planned, and I will share some of those with the interviewee ahead of time, just so that they don't feel like they're unaware of what's happening, and you don't want to catch people off guard. People should be prepared. Like I prepared for the episode, so they should be able to prepare for the episodes as well. Now, after I have had the idea, I've started writing it, I'm ready to move on to the next step, which is, of course, like the production side of the podcast. And so I would say that each episode takes between 2 and 4 hours, and that may or may not include research. If I'm doing a book club episode, it's taking me way longer than 2 to 4 hours because I've had to read the book. But sometimes if I'm doing an episode similar to this one, where I am just kind of going over things that I already know and sharing them and kind of organizing the ideas, then it probably takes me between 2 and 4 hours. So the 2 and 4 hours includes any sort of outlining, editing of the outline, recording of the episode, like I am right now in GarageBand, which comes on every Macintosh computer, phone, iPhone, and iPad. So yeah, I edit the episode after I've done recording it, which is probably pretty obvious. I write the show notes and gather all of the links and put those into the Bear app for this episode. I post the show to my content management system. I think that's what they're called. And I use Buzzsprout, which distributes the show to whatever service it is that you use to listen to podcasts. So if you are a big Apple Podcasts person, then Buzzsprout will share it there. And for instance, I use an app called Pocket Casts to listen to podcasts because I listen to a lot, and so it's just better for organizing. And Buzzsprout also distributes the podcast there. So that's what I use. I also will make a YouTube recording of the podcast episode and I will post it there, which is really easy. And I use a service called FusionCast to do that. And after I've done all of that, after it's posted in all of its places, then I will use Canva to create any sort of little graphics for the show. And then I will update the website, and the website editor that I use is Podpage. And yes, I do all of the website maintenance and upkeep and design. I did it all myself. So, pat me on the back for that. And Podpage is a really good service that integrates with Buzzsprout, which is part of the reason that I did it. So it's really automatic, and I need for this process to have as many automated things as it possibly can. And so that's why I use that service. But I really, really like what they're doing, and they're continually updating the capabilities of the service. So I highly, highly recommend checking out Podpage if you are looking for a website for your podcast. You don't have to have one. You don't have to have a website for your podcast, but I do. And I do think that at some point, if you keep doing your podcast, you're going to want a website to go along with it. So just keep that in mind. But there are plenty of free website hosts and builders. So just use one of those, like you use Anchor, and you'll be good to go. And then, of course, I make some social media posts. I use a scheduler called later.com so that I don't forget. But, of course, whenever a post goes up, I have a reminder, and I make sure to check it and share it with people and all those things. Now, I'm going to talk about interviews. I do interviews on this show, because I love listening and learning from people, and I hope that you gain some insight from those episodes as well. This isn't an interview only podcast, and it won't ever be. If I wanted to switch into doing interview onlys, I would probably just start a different show, because that's not really the focus of this particular show. So that's why I don't do them every single week, but I do enjoy doing them. And the steps are generally the same, aside from that you need to schedule the guests, and you need to ask them. Once they've said yes, you need to schedule them, and you need to share the info. And if you want to be a guest on this show, just let me know. Send me a DM, send me an email, and we will make it happen. But when you are working with someone else, you're not ever really sure about their setup, as far as what computer do they have, what microphone are they using, what environment are they in. And so I use a service called Squadcast, which is like Zoom for podcasting, and it helps to kind of standardize and streamline a lot of the sound and environment that comes from recording a podcast with two people. So it is a paid service, but I am getting a lot of use out of the service, and so I feel as though it is worth it. If you are, trying to not spend any money on creating your podcast, then I recommend you use Zoom, which has a free recording feature and is going to sound good. And you can also just upload that into Anchor. Anchor also has a way for you to do interviews as well. So again, that is kind of like a free alternative to doing that. Interviews do take a little bit more editing, because instead of editing one person's track, you're editing two people's track, and then kind of like the scheduling and organizing of that, it might take a little bit more in the back end, because you want to make sure that the person knows and you've told them and all of that. But yeah, if you want to do an interview show, do an interview show. Just make sure that you have an interesting angle and that you are interviewing people that you are interested in talking to. That would be my advice when you're first starting out. I say that like I've done 50 interviews. I haven't. But, I also, when I'm listening to people do interviews, these are the things that I think about. You can definitely tell when someone is interested in the person they're interviewing and when they're not. So just be interested in whoever you're interviewing. There are a few other apps and services that I use to make the show. The first one is Epidemic Sounds. And if you hear that music in the background, that music is from Epidemic Sounds. And so they have music for podcasts, videos, commercials, all of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I really like it. It does cost, but I do feel as though it is worth the money. There are free alternatives for you to be able to use sounds. For the beginning, for the very first music I had, I got it from a free website and it was fine. It got me going. And I will probably always continue to change out the music because that is fun for me. So I use Epidemic Sounds to find that music. Headliner is a super cool app that lets you make those videos that you post on social media of podcasts. And so you can also do that right in Buzzsprout. Headliner has a free version that I use, and Buzzsprout also has a version of it which is included in your monthly payment to them, which is pretty affordable. For email marketing and newsletters, I use ConvertKit, which is free. And you should be signed up for the newsletter, especially now, because let me tell you, what's coming in September is going to be awesome. But you should be signed up for the newsletter. Link in the show notes. I use Buy Me a Coffee. This is the storefront for the Musically Cogitating Podcast store, and it allows for you to support the show if you wish to do so with a small donation. You can buy me a coffee, or you can buy me a book, or anything else that you want to buy me and want to help support the show with. I also use Bookshop, which allows me to share and recommend books and possibly receive a small commission. So Bookshop is a really great service. I highly recommend using it to purchase audio books as well as physical books. I use it and I love it a lot. I use Sticker Mule and Vistaprint for making all of the physical products as of right now. And yeah, those are all of the other kinds of services that I use. None of these services are the end all be all. I have just found them to be the ones that I like, and so that's what I use. Ultimately, you need to use the services that are best for you. Use what you can afford. So if you're trying to do this all for free, use things that you already have, and that'll be great. And I'm willing to bet that no one is going to notice if you do all of it with free services. I could do all of this with free services. It might look different, but no one's going to really notice. So just do that. Use the services that you know that you're going to use. Don't pay for something that you know you're not going to use. I just did lots of Googling around, and I picked things based off of course, other people's recommendations, other podcasts, and stuff like that. And because I didn't have that much time to be looking around at all of the different things. So don't let picking where you're going to have your website stop you from making your show. Or don't let deciding, where you're going to write your podcast or notes stop you from making the show. Just do in a place where you already do things and keep it moving and post your show. Like I said, I cannot recommend starting a podcast enough. It's just amazing, and I want there to be more podcasts in the world. And yes, there are a lot, but a lot of people aren't able to always keep them up as they might have wished. So just start one, and if you don't like it, okay, that's fine. But at least you started it, and you can always say, hey, I had a podcast. So yeah, I just think you should do it. Since this is a show about music, and in this episode about podcasts, I wanted to recommend something for you to listen to, and this week's music recommendation is The Sun Also Rises, which is an album recorded by my dear friend and best pal, duo partner, Jamie Monk. And I think that he did an incredible job. I'm not sure if he's listening to this, but if you're listening to this, Jamie, I love the album. Thank you so much for recording it. It is absolutely beautiful. And so I'm happy to be able to recommend and share this with you. Please go buy his album and support it on Bandcamp. The link is in the description, as it always is. Don't forget to follow the podcast on social media and the website, and to sign up for the newsletter, because like I said, things are coming, really exciting things for the month of September. So, come on, sign up. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please give the show a rating and review, as it helps me to know if you are enjoying the show, and it also helps other people to find the show. And if you are interested in supporting the podcast with a small donation, you can do so using the Buy Me a Coffee or support the show link in the show notes. So that is all I have for you today. I will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of the Musically Cogitating podcast. Until then,